The woman pulled in at 2:14 a.m. on a Wednesday in March, and I knew what she was before she opened the driver's door because the engine wasn't ticking. Every engine ticks when you kill it. That's metal cooling, contracting, the small death rattle of combustion winding down. You stand in a desert service bay long enough, you can hear it across a parking lot. The tick-tick-tick of a hot engine is the most honest sound a car makes. It tells you everything. How far it's driven, how hard it's been pushed, when it last stopped. Her engine didn't tick. She pulled a 2009 Honda Accord into the lot, parked under the sodium light nearest the pumps, and turned the key off, and the car went silent the way a television goes silent. Total, immediate, no cooling, no settling, like it had never been running at all. I put my hand on the Craftsman torque wrench I keep on the bench by the bay door, not as a weapon, as a thermometer. I'll explain that later. She got out. She was maybe 40, jeans, a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled, hiking boots that had seen actual hiking. She looked tired in a way that was real, not performed, not dangerous, just the tiredness of someone who has been driving a long time. She looked at the station. She looked at me, standing in the bay with the overhead fluorescents turning my skin the color of old paper. She walked toward me. "Are you open?" she asked. "Depends," I said. "On what?" "On what you need." She said her AC had died somewhere past Barstow and she needed it looked at before she hit the long stretch toward Needles. She said she'd pay cash. She said she was in a hurry. I looked at her car. I looked at the dashboard through the windshield. The temperature gauge was visible from where I stood, and it was pegged at the bottom. Not at the normal resting position at the very bottom of the gauge, below the cold mark, in a place no needle should physically reach. I said, "I can't help you tonight." And she said, "This is the part I need you to hear." She said, "He told me you'd say that. My name is Dale Whitaker. I'm 51. I've been a mechanic since I was 15, which means I've been turning wrenches for 36 years. I did not go to college. I did not go to trade school. I learned from a man named Cecil Pruitt at a Chevron station in Victorville when I was a sophomore in high school with a D average and hands that wouldn't stop shaking from the Adderall my mother's boyfriend sold me at cost. Cecil taught me that engines are logical, that every sound means something, that if you listen, actually listen, not hear, listen, a machine will tell you everything that's wrong with it and most of what's wrong with the person who drives it. I believed that for 35 years. Then I came to work at Ballard's. Ballard's Service and Fuel sits on a 2-lane stretch of old Route 66 alignment between Ludlow and Amboy in the Mojave Desert, San Bernardino County, California. If you've driven the interstate between Barstow and Needles, you've passed within 8 miles of it without knowing. The station is not on the interstate. It's on the old road, the one that runs parallel, sometimes visible from I-40, sometimes not, dipping behind lava fields and dry lake beds and stretches of nothing so absolute that your phone drops to no service and stays there for 40 minutes. The station is old, built in 1958 by a man named Howard Ballard, who I never met, who died in 1991, and whose grandson, also named Howard, but everyone calls him Howie, hired me in October of 2024 after I answered an ad on Craigslist that said, "Mechanic needed, remote location, housing included, must be comfortable alone." I was comfortable alone. I had been alone since my second divorce finalized in August 2024, which left me with a 2004 F-150, $1,100, a storage unit in Hesperia full of tools, and the understanding that I was the kind of man women leave not because I'm cruel, but because I'm absent. I'm in the bay. I'm under the hood. I'm listening to the engine instead of the person sitting across from me at dinner telling me that she needs me to look at her the way I look at a timing belt, with that focus, with that care, and I nod and I say I understand, and I go back to the bay, because the bay is where things make sense. Howie Ballard was 28 and lived in Riverside and had no interest in the station. His grandfather's will had left it to him with the stipulation that it remain operational, and Howie's solution was to hire someone who would live there and run it and not bother him. The pay was $38,000 a year plus free housing in the apartment above the service bay. The housing was a one-bedroom unit with a working shower, a hot plate, a window AC that fought the desert to a draw, and a view of the most empty landscape I have ever seen. I took the job because I had nowhere else to be. I want to be clear about that. This is not a story about a man who was forced into something. I chose this. I drove out to the Mojave in October 2024 and I parked my truck and I walked into the service bay and I smelled grease and dust and the particular dry mineral scent of desert air moving through an open garage, and I thought, this is fine. This is where I'll be. Howie drove out with me that first day. He showed me the pumps too, vintage, the kind with the rolling number displays that haven't been manufactured since the 80s but still work if you maintain them. He showed me the service bay, 2 lifts, 1 hydraulic, 1 mechanical, a compressor, a parts wall that was sparse but functional. He showed me the apartment, which was clean enough. He showed me the generator, which backed up the grid power that came in on a line from Ludlow and failed about once a month. Then he took me into the office, a small room between the bay and the storefront, and he opened the desk drawer and pulled out a plastic sleeve, the kind you'd keep a car title in, and inside was a single sheet of paper, typewritten, old. The paper was yellowed, but the type was crisp. At the top it said, Ballard's Service Operational Guidelines, and underneath, in pen, someone had written, non-negotiable. Howie handed it to me. He said, my grandfather was a specific kind of guy. I don't know what half of this means. I just know the last 2 mechanics followed it and didn't have problems, and the one before them didn't follow it and quit after 3 weeks. I looked at the sheet. There were 7 items. 1. Service hours are sunrise to midnight. No exceptions, no extensions. If a vehicle arrives after midnight, you may sell fuel, but you may not perform mechanical work of any kind until sunrise. 2. Before beginning work on any vehicle, place your hand on the engine block. If the block is warm or hot, proceed normally. If the block is cold, do not service the vehicle. Tell the driver you are unable to help. Do not explain why. Do not offer alternatives. 3. If a cold engine vehicle is present on the lot after midnight, turn off the exterior lights. All of them. Leave only the bay fluorescents on. Do not go outside until the vehicle leaves or until sunrise, whichever comes first. 4. The radio in the office receives a weather band on Channel 7. During summer months, May to September, check it at sunset. If it broadcasts a tone you have not heard before, close the bay doors and do not open them until morning, regardless of who asks. 5. Once per month, usually during a new moon, you will hear an engine idling in the lot between 2 and 4 a.m. You will not see a vehicle. Do not go outside to investigate. The sound will stop on its own. 6. If a driver whose vehicle you refused service asks to use the phone, allow it. If they ask to stay until morning, allow it. But they must remain in the office. They cannot enter the bay, the apartment, or the lot after dark. If they refuse these terms, they must leave immediately. 7. The bay floor has a drain in the northeast corner. Once per week, pour 1 gallon of used motor oil down this drain. This is not optional. If you have no used oil, purchase new oil and pour it. The drain must be fed. I read it twice. I looked at Howie. Your grandfather wrote this? Typed it, yeah. Probably in the 70s based on the typewriter. And you follow it? Howie laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a dismissive one. Man, I don't come out here. That's why I hired you. I follow it by paying someone to follow it. Last guy, Pete, he was here for 3 years. Never complained. Said the rules were easy. Said the hardest part was the boredom. What about the one who quit? Howie shrugged. Before my time. Grandpa told my dad the guy got spooked. Didn't say by what. He left that afternoon. Drove back to Riverside. I stood in the bay with the sheet in my hand and read it a third time, and then I pinned it to the corkboard above the desk, and I didn't think about it again for 6 days. I'm going to tell you about those first 3 months, not because they were frightening, but because you need to understand the rhythm of this place before I break it. Ballard's gets maybe 5 or 6 vehicles a day, some days less, some days none. They're mostly long-haul truckers who know the old road, retirees in RVs who took the scenic route, and the occasional tourist with a blown radiator hose who found us on a map app that hasn't been updated since 2018. I pumped gas, I changed oil, I replaced belts and hoses and brake pads, and once, memorably, a transmission mount on a 1994 Winnebago driven by a retired schoolteacher from Flagstaff who talked to me for 4 hours about her dead husband while I lay on my back under her rig, and she sat in a lawn chair and drank lemonade from a thermos. The work was not hard. The isolation was not hard. What was hard, and this surprised me because I thought I was built for this, was the silence, not the absence of sound. The desert is never silent. There's wind, and there's the creak of the building, and there's the hum of the grid power on the lines. What I mean is the silence between things, the gaps. In a city, in a town, even in Victorville, there's a continuity to sound. One noise flows into the next, and you're never alone with a gap long enough to think in. In the Mojave, the gaps are enormous. A truck passes and then there is nothing for 20 minutes, and in that 20 minutes you are the only moving thing for miles, and you hear yourself breathing, and you hear the oil settling in the engines on the lot, and you hear the drain in the northeast corner of the bay doing what drains do, which is nothing, which is sitting there open, dark, waiting to be fed. I poured the oil down the drain on my first Saturday. Rule 7, 1 gallon of used 10W30 from the catch pan. I poured it and it went down, and I heard it hit something maybe 10 feet below a splash, thin, like pouring into a pipe rather than a basin. It echoed slightly. I stood up and went back to work and did not think about it. The following Saturday, I poured again. Same sound, same echo. The third Saturday, this was late October, I poured, and there was no splash. The oil went down and there was no sound at all. Not silence absence, as if the pipe went down farther than before, or as if whatever was at the bottom had moved. I'm a mechanic. I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in ghosts or curses or anything that can't be diagnosed with a code reader and a multimeter, but I stood over that drain on the third Saturday, and I felt something I had not felt since I was a child, which was the conviction that something was listening to me from below, and that it was patient, and it was close, and it had been expecting me. I poured the oil every Saturday after that. I did not skip a week. I did not look into the drain. November, the first cold engine car. It came in at 11:40 a.m. on a Tuesday, which is broad daylight in the Mojave, which is 80 degrees in the shade, which is the time of day when nothing bad happens. It was a Ford Taurus, silver, maybe 2006, Nevada plates. Driven by a man in his 60s with white hair and a bolo tie and the particular leathery skin of someone who has lived in the desert his entire life. He pulled up to the bay and got out and said he had a grinding noise from the front end and could I take a look. I said sure. I walked to the car. I put my hand on the hood the way I always do habit, but now guided by Rule 2. The hood was cold, not cool. Cold, like touching a piece of metal that has been sitting in a refrigerator. In direct desert sunlight, at 80 degrees, the hood of this car was cold enough that my palm registered it as wrong before my brain could articulate why. I pulled my hand back. I looked at the man. He was smiling. Normal smile, normal eyes, normal posture. Nothing about him was wrong except the car he'd driven in on. "I can't help you today," I said. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He said, "That right?" "Yeah, I'm booked up." I wasn't. There wasn't another car on the lot. He looked at the empty bay. He looked at me. His smile didn't change, but something behind it did, a rearrangement, like a mask settling into a different position on the same face. "All right," he said. "I'll try somewhere else." He got back in the Taurus. He started the engine and I heard it. And this is when I knew the rules were not eccentric. The rules were not a dead man's paranoia. The engine started and it sounded wrong. Not mechanically wrong, acoustically wrong. The sound of an engine is combustion, air and fuel and spark, a contained explosion happening thousands of times per minute. This engine sounded like combustion in reverse, like something being inhaled rather than expelled, a sucking sound, a drawing in. He pulled out of the lot and drove east toward Amboy. I watched until the car was a shimmer on the blacktop, and then I went inside and I sat at the desk and I put my hands flat on the surface to stop them from shaking. They weren't shaking from the Adderall. I haven't taken Adderall in 20 years. They were shaking because my palms were still cold. Both of them. And only the right one had touched the car. 3 more cold engine vehicles came in during November and December. I turned them all away. A pickup truck with Arizona plates driven by a young woman who barely reacted. A Chrysler minivan driven by no one. It pulled in, sat for 10 minutes and pulled out, and I never saw a driver through the windshield. Just that cold glass, that motionless cabin, that engine that didn't tick when it stopped and didn't combust when it ran. And a Subaru Outback driven by a man who cried when I told him I couldn't help, and said he'd been driving for 3 days and couldn't find anyone who would look at his car, and I almost broke. But I put my hand on his engine block and the cold went up my arm like a current, and I pulled back and I said, "I'm sorry, sir. I can't." He left. They all left. Daylight encounters, undramatic, the refusal accepted, the vehicle departing. Whatever Rule 2 was protecting me from, it seemed content to leave when told no. Then came January, and the midnight threshold, and I learned what happens when they don't leave. January 9th, a Dodge Charger, black, no plates. Pulled in at 12:25 a.m. I was in the apartment. I heard the tires on the gravel and I looked out the window and I saw the car sitting under the sodium light, and I watched for a full minute before the driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was young, late 20s, built like someone who worked with his body, thick arms, heavy shoulders. He was wearing a black t-shirt in January in the desert, which meant he was either running from something warm or he didn't feel cold. He looked at the station. He walked toward the bay door, which was open because I'd been airing out a brake fluid spill. I went downstairs. I met him at the bay entrance. Up close, he looked normal, tired, frustrated, human. "Hey," he said. "I've got a knock in the engine. Can you listen to it?" "It's after midnight. I can't do any work until sunrise." "It's just a listen. I'm not asking you to fix it tonight. Just tell me what it is so I know what I'm dealing with. Rule 1 is absolute. No mechanical work of any kind after midnight. But listening isn't work, is it?" That's what I told myself. Listening is what mechanics do. Listening is my whole identity, the thing Cecil taught me, the thing that made me good, the only thing I've ever been good at. "Pop the hood," I said. He walked to the car. He pulled the hood release. The hood swung up on its struts. I walked around to the front. I didn't touch the engine. I remembered that much. I just leaned in and looked, and what I saw made me step back so fast I hit the pump island behind me with my hip and nearly went down. The engine block was frosted, in the desert, in an engine bay that should have been 200 degrees from running. There was actual frost on the intake manifold, on the valve covers, on the headers. White, crystalline, delicate, the kind of frost you see on a windshield in Michigan in December. And the frost was spreading. I watched it crackle outward along the firewall, reaching toward the fender wells, and underneath the frost the metal was changing color, going from engine black to a gray that was too even, too smooth, like the metal was being replaced one molecule at a time by something that looked like metal but wasn't. The man was standing beside me. He hadn't moved when I jumped back. He was watching me the way a mechanic watches a customer who just noticed the repair is going to be expensive. "You see it," he said. "Get off my lot. It's getting worse. It started in the block and now it's in the frame. Another week it'll be in the cabin, and then it'll be in me." He said this calmly, factually, like he was reading his own diagnosis. "Your boss's grandfather knew what this was. He built this station on top of the only thing that slows it down. I don't know what you're talking about. Get off my lot." "The drain, Dale." I went still. He knew my name. I had not told him my name. "The drain in your bay floor, where you pour the oil. What do you think is down there?" I said nothing. "It's a well. Ballard sank it in 1958. 60 feet straight down into a formation that hasn't been named or mapped because everyone who's found it has had the good sense to build on top of it and keep feeding it and never, ever let it get hungry. That's what the oil is for. That's what this whole station is for. The gas, the oil, the diesel. It's a feeding station, not for cars, for the thing underneath. And the thing underneath is what gets into the engines. You need to leave. It gets in through cold. That's how it moves. It drops the temperature in the block, then the drivetrain, then the chassis, then the cabin, and then the driver. It's a parasite. It feeds on combustion, on the heat, the energy, the process itself. An engine is a perfect host. Thousands of explosions per minute, all that heat, all that motion. It drinks it. And when the engine's drained, it moves to the next heat source, which, in a car, is the person sitting behind the wheel. I was backing toward the bay. I was not thinking clearly. The frost on the engine had reached the grill and I could hear it, a faint, high, continuous cracking, like ice forming on a lake accelerated to real time. Your rule says don't service cold engine cars. You know why? Because the tools connect you. The wrench, the socket, the jack metal conducts it. You put a wrench on that engine, and it comes up through the steel and into your hand, and then you're part of the circuit. Ballard lost 2 fingers learning that. Left hand. Check the photos in the office. I was in the bay now. The man was still at the car. He hadn't followed me. He was standing in the sodium light, and his shadow was wrong, too long, stretched eastward, except the light was directly above him and his shadow should have been at his feet. "I can't leave," he said. "If I get back in the car, it finishes. If I stay here, it finishes slower because the well draws some of it off. That's the deal. That's what Ballard figured out. The station isn't just a feeding point. It's a trap. It draws them in. Cars that are infected, they gravitate here because the well calls to the thing inside them the way a magnet calls iron. They come here, and the well pulls some of it out, and sometimes the driver gets to leave." "Rule 6, I said. I wasn't talking to him. I was talking to myself. "You can stay in the office until morning. You can't enter the bay. You can't go outside after dark." He looked at me. His eyes were normal, human, afraid. "Will that work?" "I don't know. It's what the paper says." He walked toward me. He stopped at the bay entrance. He looked at the threshold concrete meeting asphalt and he stepped over it. The moment his foot hit the bay floor, I felt it in the drain. Not a sound. A pull. Like standing at the edge of a cliff and feeling gravity suggest, gently, that you lean forward. "Office is through there," I said. "Don't touch anything in the bay." He walked to the office. He sat in the chair. He put his hands on his knees, and he looked at the wall, and he said, "Thank you." I closed the bay doors. I turned off the exterior lights. I went upstairs. At 3 a.m., I looked out the window. His car was still in the lot. The frost had covered the entire vehicle, and the sodium light which I'd turned off, which should not have been on the car, glittered like a jewel, like something precious, like something you'd want to touch. At sunrise, I went downstairs. The office was empty. The chair was where he'd sat. On the desk was a set of car keys, Dodge aftermarket fob, warm to the touch. His car was gone. I never saw him again. I don't know if he left in the car. I don't know if the car left with him. I know the keys were warm, and the chair was warm, and the office smelled faintly of something sweet and mineral, like coolant mixed with copper, and the drain in the bay was making a sound I had never heard before. A low, satisfied, almost digestive murmur. I poured an extra gallon of oil that morning. The drain took it without a splash. February through early March, I started paying attention to things I hadn't before. The drain, the well, whatever it was. I got a flashlight and I lay on my stomach and I pointed the beam straight down. The pipe was maybe 8 inches in diameter, steel-lined, and it went down farther than the flashlight could reach. The walls were slick not with oil, with something that looked like oil but moved differently, slower, with a sheen that shifted between black and a very dark red depending on the angle of the light. And about 15 feet down, the pipe widened. I could see the edges flaring outward, and below that, nothing. Not darkness, nothing. The beam didn't illuminate. It just stopped, as if the light had reached a surface that absorbed it completely. I pulled back. I replaced the grate over the drain. I did not look again, but I started noticing the temperature. The bay floor, near the drain, was always cool. Not cold, not like the engines, but cooler than the rest of the concrete by maybe 5 degrees, and the cool zone was growing. In October, it had been about a foot around the drain. By February, it was 3 feet. By March, 4. I measured it with a laser thermometer. 91 degrees at the bay entrance, 86 degrees at the lift, 79 degrees at the drain. On a day when the ambient air temperature was 103, the well was hungry, or the well was growing, or both. And the cold engine cars were coming more frequently twice in February, 3 times in the first 2 weeks of March. I turned them all away. I was clean and efficient about it. Hand on the hood, feel the cold, say no, watch them leave. Most of them left without argument. One, a woman in a Nissan Pathfinder, argued, and I stood firm, and she called me a word I won't repeat, and she drove away, and I watched her taillights until they disappeared, and I thought, she might not make it to the next town. She might freeze in her own driver's seat on a highway in the desert because I refused to help her. But Rule 2 doesn't say help them. Rule 2 says, do not service the vehicle. And I am a man who follows rules because following rules is easier than deciding, and deciding is the thing I have never been good at. Deciding is for wives and friends and people who look at you across dinner tables. Deciding is human. Rules are mechanical. And I chose the machine a long time ago. I want you to sit with that for a second, because that's the thing about me that matters, and it's the thing about me that nearly killed everyone. The woman with the Honda Accord. 2:14 a.m., Wednesday in March. I've already told you about her arrival. The cold engine, the missing tick, the way she said, he told me you'd say that. I was in the bay. She was in the lot. The exterior lights were on because I hadn't turned them off yet. She'd arrived only minutes after midnight. I'd been reorganizing the parts shelf and lost track. Who told you? I asked. The man in the black Charger. He said I'd find a mechanic here who would turn me away and that I should tell you, the oil isn't enough anymore. My hands were on the torque wrench. The metal was cool, not cold cool, the way the bay floor was cool near the drain. The creeping ambient temperature drop that meant the well was pulling harder than the oil could satisfy. He told me the well needs more, she said. That's why more of us are coming. It's not that there are more infected cars. It's that the well is pulling harder. It's drawing them from farther away. He said Ballard used to service 2 or 3 a year. Now you're getting 2 or 3 a month. In a year, it'll be 2 or 3 a week. And eventually the pull will be strong enough that every car on I-40 will feel it, and they'll start taking the exit and they won't know why, and they'll pull in here with engines that are already going cold, and you'll be standing in a bay that's 40 degrees in the middle of August trying to turn them away one at a time. She took a step toward me. 1 step. She stopped. He told me you're a good mechanic. He said you listen better than anyone he's ever met. He said that's why Ballard built the station this way, not just to feed the well, but to have someone here who could hear when it changed, when it started wanting more. What does it want? She looked at me. She looked at the bay floor. She looked at the drain. It wants a mechanic, she said. It's always wanted a mechanic, someone who understands combustion. Someone who can feel the difference between a healthy engine and a sick one through their hands. It's been drinking oil for 70 years, but oil is dead. It's already been burned. What it needs, what it's always needed, is someone who can bring the live ones in, the running engines, the ones with real heat, not the scraps, the feast. The temperature in the bay dropped. I felt it. Not gradually all at once, like someone opened a door in winter, except the door was beneath me and the winter was 60 feet down. He told me to tell you that you have a choice, she said. You can keep following the rules and turn us away one by one, and the well will get hungrier and the radius will grow, and in 5 years every car in the Mojave will be cold, and you'll be the last warm thing for 100 miles. Or you can do what Ballard did. What he really did, not what's on the paper. What's in the drain. I don't know what that means. Ballard didn't just feed the well. He serviced the cars. He opened the hoods and he put his hands on the engines and he pulled the cold out. Through the tools, through the metal, through his own body and down through the bay floor and into the well. He was a conduit, a filter. The cars came in cold and left hot because he took the infection out of them and gave it to the well, and the well was satisfied because it wasn't getting dead oil, it was getting the real thing, the parasite, the cold, the whatever it is that gets into the combustion and kills it. She held up her hands. They were shaking. He died doing it, she said. The cold went through him for 33 years, and it took his fingers and his toes and his feeling, and eventually it took his heart. But every car he touched left clean. Every driver left alive. That's what the station is for, Dale. Not to turn people away. To fix them. I stood in the bay, and I felt the cold pulling at my feet through the concrete. And I looked at this woman, and I thought about Cecil Pruitt, who taught me that every engine will tell you what's wrong if you listen. And I thought about my ex-wife, who told me I cared more about machines than people. And I thought about the man in the Charger whose keys were warm and whose car was gone, and who had sat in my office all night because I gave him a chair and a room, and that was the most I knew how to give anyone. And I thought, the rules aren't protection. The rules are retirement. The rules are what Ballard wrote when he was too old and too cold and too close to dead to do the real work anymore. The rules are the version you leave behind when you can't be the conduit, and you need someone to at least keep the well fed until the next person comes along who's willing to do what you did. The rules are not how you save people. The rules are how you stop saving people and don't lose the station. If I do this, I said, what happens to me? The same thing that happened to Ballard, eventually. How long? He lasted 33 years. I'm 51. Then you'd better start tonight. I need to tell you what happened next in a way that makes sense, because it doesn't make sense. Not really, not in any framework I have for understanding the physical world. But I'm a mechanic and mechanics deal with what is, Not what should be, so here's what is. I walked to her car. I popped the hood. I put both hands on the engine block. The cold hit me like a wall of water. Not temperature force. It came up through my palms and into my wrists and forearms, and it was not cold the way ice is cold. It was cold the way absence is cold. The absence of combustion. The absence of process. The absence of the fundamental reaction that makes an engine, fuel meeting, air meeting, spark meeting motion. The thing inside her engine had eaten all of it. Every explosion, every cycle, every firing of every cylinder. It had consumed the engine's history of running and left behind a machine that had never been started, that had never burned anything, that was as thermodynamically dead as a rock. And I could feel it, the way you can feel the difference between a good bearing and a bad one through a stethoscope, the way you can feel a misfire through the frame. I could feel the parasite, and it was a parasite. The man in the Charger was right about that. I could feel it in the metal, dense and patient and heavy, clinging to the iron the way rust clings, except rust is a process. And this was the opposite of a process. This was the end of all processes. This was entropy with an appetite. I held on. The cold moved up my arms. It hit my shoulders, my chest. My breath came out in a visible cloud, which was impossible. It was 65 degrees in the desert at night, not cold enough for visible breath. But my body temperature was dropping. I could feel my heartbeat slowing, not racing, slowing, like the thing was reaching for the combustion inside me too. The biological combustion. Glucose and oxygen and the small controlled explosions that keep a human body at 98.6 degrees. I held on and I listened. That's what Cecil taught me. Listen. And I heard it, the engine's voice, underneath the cold, buried but not dead. A Honda 4-cylinder, 2.4-liter, K24 series, 166 horsepower. A good engine, a reliable engine. An engine that had been running fine until something crawled inside it on a highway in the dark and started drinking its fire. I pulled. I don't know how else to describe it. I pulled the way you pull a seized bolt, not with force but with patience, with steadiness, with the understanding that metal has memory, and if you apply consistent pressure, it will remember what shape it wants to be. I pulled the cold through the block, through my hands, through my arms and chest and gut and legs and feet and down through the concrete and into the drain. And the well drank. I felt it receive. Not a splash, not a sound. A pull from below that matched my pull from above. And for a moment, I was a wire stretched between 2 points, the car and the well. And the cold moved through me like current through copper. And it was the most painful thing I have ever experienced, and it was also the most purposeful. The engine block warmed, degree by degree, like sunrise. The frost receded. The metal changed color, going from that dead gray back to engine black. I felt the K24 wake up under my hands. Not start, wake up. The difference between a machine that is off and a machine that could be on. Potential, readiness, the willingness to combust. I let go. I stepped back. My hands were white. Not pale white, like the blood had been replaced by something else. I held them up and watched the color return slowly, the pink creeping back from my wrists toward my fingertips like a tide coming in. The woman was standing by the driver's door. She was watching me. Her face was wet. "Start it," I said. She got in. She turned the key. The Honda started, and it sounded it sounded right. It sounded the way a K24 is supposed to sound. Clean, smooth, the small, confident hum of 4 cylinders firing in sequence. Combustion, real combustion, the most basic miracle of the modern world. She revved it once. The engine responded. She let it idle. The temperature gauge climbed from the bottom of the scale to the middle, where it belonged, where it had always belonged before the thing found it. She looked at me through the windshield. She mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." She pulled out of the lot. Her taillights glowed red and hot and real. I listened to the engine until I couldn't hear it anymore, and then I listened to the silence, and the silence was different, warmer, fuller. The gap between sounds was smaller. I looked down at my hands. They were pink. They were mine. But in the center of each palm was a small white spot, perfectly circular, about the size of a dime. Frostbite, not surface frostbite, deep, the kind that doesn't heal. I went into the bay. I stood over the drain. The murmur was louder now, satisfied, full, but already, and I could hear this, because listening is what I do, already starting to want again. That was 3 weeks ago. It's late March now. I've serviced 9 cold engine cars since that night. I work on them the same way each time, hands on the block, pull the cold, feed the well. Every time the car leaves running. Every time the driver leaves alive. Every time the white spots on my hands grow a little larger. They're the size of quarters now. Both palms. The skin is hard and numb and permanently cool to the touch. I can still grip a wrench. I can still turn a bolt. But I can't feel the difference between a 1/4 inch and a 5/16 anymore with my fingertips. I have to look. For a mechanic, that's like a musician going deaf in one ear. You compensate and you adjust, but you know what you're losing and you know it's not coming back. My feet are cold all the time. I wear 2 pairs of socks in the desert in March. The bay floor near the drain is 58 degrees now. The cool zone is 6 feet across. I sleep upstairs with the space heater running, and I still wake up shivering at 3 a.m. and I lie in bed and I feel the well pulling, gently, constantly. The way gravity pulls, not a command, an invitation, an orientation of everything toward a center. I called Howie last week. I asked him about his grandfather. I asked him specifically about the left hand. Long silence. He was missing 2 fingers, Howie said. Index and middle, left hand. He said he lost them in Korea, but my dad said that was bullshit. My dad said Grandpa lost them in the shop. How? Dad said he was working on a truck one night and his fingers just went white and didn't come back. Like frostbite. Dad said Grandpa kept working for another 15 years after that. Lost feeling in his feet, then his shins, then his knees. By the time he died, he couldn't feel anything below his elbows. He used to joke that he was the only mechanic in California who could grab a hot exhaust manifold barehanded. Your dad didn't think that was strange? My dad didn't ask questions about the station. Nobody in my family asks questions about the station. That's kind of the deal. I hung up. I sat in the office and I looked at the rules on the corkboard, and I understood them fully for the first time. Rule 1 isn't about safety. It's about rest. Ballard was telling the next mechanic, don't work at night because the night is when they come the hardest, and you need to conserve what you have. You can't do this 24 hours a day. You'll burn out. Take the nights off. Let the rules do the work while you sleep. Rule 2 isn't about avoiding the cold engine cars. It's about identifying them. The hand on the block is a diagnostic. Ballard was teaching the next mechanic how to feel what he felt, how to recognize the parasite. The rule says, don't service them because Ballard was too far gone to do it himself. By the time he wrote the rules, his hands were dead. He couldn't pull anymore, and all he could do was turn them away and hope they found another station. There is no other station. I've looked. There's nothing else out here on the old road for 80 miles in either direction. This is the only well. This is the only place the cold engine cars are drawn to. And Ballard spent 33 years emptying them with his bare hands, and he didn't write the rules to protect his successor. He wrote them to buy time until his successor was ready. I want to tell you about last night because last night is why I'm talking to you. A sedan pulled in at 1:50 a.m. Old model, couldn't tell the make, no plates. It rolled to a stop under the sodium light and the engine cut off, and there was no tick, no cooling, no sound. I was already downstairs. I'd been sleeping less. The cold in my feet keeps me up, and the sound of the well keeps me up, and the knowledge that something is coming keeps me up. I walked out to the car. I didn't wait for the driver. I put my hand on the hood. Warm. Not cold. Warm. Normal. A perfectly normal engine that had been running and had stopped and was cooling the way engines cool. I pulled my hand back. I looked at the car. I looked at the driver's side window. There was no one inside. The car was empty. Running, driven to my lot, parked under the light, and empty. The seat was adjusted for someone about 5'10". The mirrors were set. The keys were in the ignition. But there was no driver, and there had never been a driver, because the seat was dry and the night was dewy, and if someone had been sitting there, the seat would have been warm and body-shaped, and it wasn't. I opened the door. The dome light came on. On the passenger seat was a piece of paper, folded once. I picked it up. It was a receipt from Ballard's Service and Fuel, dated June 14th, 1991. Which was the day Howard Ballard died. The service listed was, full system flush, no charge, and written on the back in handwriting that matched the non-negotiable on the rules sheet were 3 sentences. The well doesn't just take, it gives back. Check the drain. I went into the bay. I knelt by the drain. I removed the grate. I pointed the flashlight down. The well was full, not of oil, of light. A dim, warm amber light that came from about 20 feet down, and it pulsed slowly, rhythmically, the way a heartbeat pulses. And the warmth that came up out of the pipe was extraordinary. Not heat warmth, the warmth of a running engine, the warmth of combustion, the warmth of every fire that the cold had eaten from every car that had ever been drained, stored now, alive, held in a formation 60 feet below the Mojave that had been drinking dead oil for decades and live cold for 33 years before that, and was now, I could hear it. I could hear it the way I hear everything mechanical, the way Cecil taught me it. It was now running. The well was an engine, not a metaphor, not a geological formation that behaved like an engine. An engine, a combustion system. Something that Ballard had built or found or woken up. Something that took in fuel oil, cold, heat, the thermodynamic refuse of every infected car that passed through the station and ran, produced, generated. The warm air coming up from the drain was exhaust. Real exhaust. The product of a process that was happening below me at a scale I could not see and a depth I could not reach. And the thing it was fighting the cold, the parasite, the entropy that crept into engines and drank their fire, it was losing. The well was winning. Slowly, decade by decade, gallon by gallon, car by car, the well was burning hotter and the cold was being consumed, and the radius was shifting, not the radius of the well's pull, but the radius of its protection. A zone of heat, expanding outward from a pipe in the floor of a gas station in the middle of nowhere, pushing back against a cold that has been creeping across the desert for longer than anyone has been measuring. Ballard didn't build a feeding station. He built a furnace, and every mechanic who stood over the drain and poured oil and pulled cold and lost feeling in their hands was adding fuel to a fire that is fighting something so large and so patient that it makes the desert look temporary. I pulled back from the drain. The warmth stayed in my face for a few minutes, then faded. The bay was cold again, 54 degrees near the drain, and falling. The well was running, but the well was hungry, because the well is always hungry, because the thing it's fighting doesn't sleep and doesn't stop. They were almost touching the edges of my fingers. 6 months, maybe 8, before my hands are fully dead. Before I'm Ballard at the end, numb from the elbows down, working by sight instead of feel, holding on through discipline and stubbornness until my heart goes cold, and I drop on the bay floor, and someone finds me and Howie puts another ad on Craigslist. I went to the desk. I opened the laptop. I pulled up Craigslist. Mechanic needed. I typed. Remote location. Housing included. Must be comfortable alone. I looked at the words. I deleted them. I'm not going to do that to someone. I'm not going to write an ad that brings another person to this station under the same terms I was brought here, ignorant, desperate, willing to follow rules they don't understand for a paycheck that doesn't justify what the job actually costs. Ballard did it. Pete did it. I'm not going to do it. But the well needs a mechanic. The cold engine cars keep coming. The parasite keeps spreading, and I'm running out of hands. So here's what I'm going to do, and here's why I'm telling you this story. I'm going to rewrite the rules, not the retirement version, not the turn them away and pour the oil and don't ask questions version, the real version, the one that says, this is what's underneath you. This is what's in the engines. This is what happens when you put your hands on the block and pull. This is what it costs, and this is what it's for. I'm going to write it all down, everything the man in the Charger told me. Everything the woman in the Accord told me, everything I've felt through my hands and heard through the drain and seen in the light 60 feet below. I'm going to put it in the desk drawer where the rules are now, and I'm going to add one line at the top. You have a choice. Read this and decide, because that's what Ballard should have written. That's what Cecil should have told me about mechanic work, not just how to listen, but what you're listening for. And what it takes from you and whether the trade is worth it. Nobody told me. Nobody tells anyone. You just show up and put your hands on the machine and it starts taking, and you don't realize what you've given until your fingers go white and your feet go cold, and you're standing in a bay at 3 a.m. feeling a furnace burn 60 feet below you, and you're the fuel. The desert is getting light. It's 5:40 a.m. I'm sitting in the office with a cup of coffee that's already gone cold, which might be the station or might just be a bad thermos. The bay doors are open. I can see the road, the old road, Route 66, the one nobody takes anymore, the one that runs through the most empty part of the most empty desert in the lower 48. There's a car coming from the west. I can see the headlights. They're about 2 miles out, moving steady. And I can't tell from here whether the engine is hot or cold. I won't know until they pull in. I won't know until I put my hand on the hood. But I already know what I'm going to do. If the engine is warm, I'll change their oil and check their brakes and send them on their way and charge them a fair price, and they'll never know what's beneath their feet. If the engine is cold, I'll open the hood and put my hands on the block, and I'll pull the dead thing out of their car and feed it to the furnace, and they'll drive away alive, and I'll stand in the bay with a little less feeling in my hands and a little more heat in the well, and the ancient math of this place will hold for one more day. That's the job, not the rules. The job. Cecil used to say, the best mechanics aren't the ones with the most tools. They're the ones who'll put their hands on the engine when nobody else will. I didn't understand that for 35 years. I thought he was talking about skill. He was talking about sacrifice. He was talking about the willingness to touch the broken thing and let it break you a little and fix it anyway, because fixing it is what you're for. The car is closer now. Half a mile. I can hear the engine. I'm listening. I always am.